Thanks, Bobby. Keep that passage open, and we're going to come to it in a moment. We're marching on in our series through James. We've made it now into the final chapter, and we've got 3 whole Sundays just in chapter 5. So we're going to take it nice and slow. We're going to mine it for gold in the coming weeks. Remember that James is all about faith in action. It's about what does it mean to trust Jesus as your Savior and your Lord and live that out authentically. Because if we're a Christian in name only, then something is off. Compartmentalized Christianity, Sunday-only Christianity, it just won't fly, right? James has been pushing that the whole time. But being a Christian, it's not like booking a holiday, right? Like we've reserved this room at this amazing destination called heaven. Jesus has covered the cost of it, thanks very much. But until we get there, it doesn't really impact on our everyday life. That's not it. James has countered that way of thinking again and again. No, we want a faith that works. Real faith is active faith, which means in every area of life, including in how we think about wealth and the wealthy, which is where we now clearly turn this morning from that reading. Let's get into it. James chapter 5, verse 1. Let's first off try and work out who James is actually talking about here. He says, "Now listen, you rich people." So the really important question that's going to help us understand the whole text is this: who are the rich people? Because we picked it up from the passage, right? James is pretty strong against them, so we got to work out who fits in that category. Is James talking about anyone who earns a certain amount of money? Is it anyone who's on a 6-figure salary? Is it a millionaire or a double homeowner or a billionaire? Well, no, it can't be that because of how he writes in the rest of the letter. Particularly with how he holds up Abraham and Job as positive examples. So James chapter 2, verse 21 back there, "Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did?" James 5:11, "You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about." Outside of the monarchy, Abraham and Job were the 2 richest guys in the Old Testament. They were both absolutely loaded. And so if James is holding up these ultra-rich guys as model examples of faith in Abraham and Job, then his point in chapter 5, verse 1 can't be this kind of general comment on rich people. It is rather talking about those who aren't living by faith and who are actively oppressing believers. That's where the wider context of the letter points us to. So back in chapter 1, verse 10 to 12, and in chapter 2, verse 6, we see there are clearly these rich people who are exploiting the believers that James is writing to. So this is who James is talking about now. Okay, but it seems like James is writing to them. He's calling them to listen up. So are these rich guys actually reading the letter? Well, no, it's not for them. It's for the Christians, but that's beside the point. Let me get really technical for a moment. It's what's known as a prophetic lament, when you speak to people who aren't present for the benefit of those who are. So this is for the benefit of the Christians who are suffering under the rich oppressors, so that they know exactly what God thinks of these guys' behavior. Okay? And James wants to highlight 3 particular characteristics of these people. 3 particular characteristics of these rich oppressors who are economically persecuting these believers. Number 1, hoarding. Look at verse 3. "You have hoarded wealth in the last days." Now, when we read that language of the last days in the New Testament, that's talking about the period between Jesus' ascension and his return. So we are now living in the last days. These are the last days because the next thing to happen in redemptive history, the final thing to happen in redemptive history, is the return of Jesus. But despite the fact that we live in these last days, that Jesus could return at any moment, Jesus calls these guys out for hoarding wealth. Just like a squirrel, just hoarding its nuts and acorns. Just these rich people are hoarding more and more wealth and possessions, not for any reason other than just because. They've got all this wealth and it's just hoarded safely away in a broad investment portfolio, tied up in multiple assets, even a load of cash tucked away in a safe in the house. And I think that's the point in verse 2 and 3. Can you see the description there? Your wealth has rotted. In other words, you've got so much of it lying around, it's just sitting there not doing anything. The banknotes are actually starting to rot because you've got so much of it. Moths have eaten your clothes. Your wardrobes are so full of stuff the moths have been at, and you don't even realize. You're not actually wearing any of these clothes. They're just hanging there just because. Your gold and silver are corroded. Again, it's just making the point that all this stuff and these riches are just piling up. They're not being put to any use. They're just lying in a vault, and they're being added to such that eventually it starts to corrode, and they're just oblivious to it because they've got so much piled away. That's the first characteristic of these rich people. They hoard wealth. Second, extravagance. Look at verse 5. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourself in the day of slaughter. So these guys, they're just living their best life now, right? They've lived in total luxury. They're satisfying every whim. It's the same thing that we heard read earlier back in Psalm 73. Remember that from Miriam? The psalmist, looking on at the unbelieving rich, writes, they have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They're free from common human burdens. They're not plagued by human ills. This is what the wicked are like, always free of care. They go on amassing wealth. Same kind of people as here in James 5. These are the sorts of people for whom money is no object. They've never had to budget. They've never had to tighten their purse string at the end of the month, waiting until they get paid. They see something, they like it, they buy it. Their houses are full of stuff they don't really need, but they just bought it on a whim one day, just because. They've got the nicest cars in the drive, the finest foods in the fridge. They travel business class or first class because they just don't really do economy. Their wardrobes are full of clothes. They've got great suits and dresses and endless pairs of shoes, and they're either overweight because of all the fine dining, or they're in phenomenal shape because they pay for a personal trainer to sculpt their bodies into perfection. Life is just easy. That's the second characteristic of these rich people. They live in extravagance. Third, injustice. Look at verse 4. It's clear that these rich people are failing to pay their workers properly. Okay, they're doing whatever they can to maximize profit for themselves and their shareholders at the expense of the guys who are actually in the fields putting the hard yards in. So the harvesters, verse 4, are crying out to God because they're being shafted by these rich people who think they can get away with not paying them what they're owed. And then verse 6, look at that conclusion. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. So because of their wealth, these guys feel like they've got the right to condemn the innocent ones. That just means that the hard-working guys who are helping to keep the business going, they're condemning them by not paying them. It's probably not that they're actually murdering them. It's more like they're just screwing them over financially, so much so that they struggle to survive. And can you see, it says at the end, who was not opposing you. The ones being oppressed don't oppose the rich because they're not in a position to do so. Right? They're the ones in the weak and vulnerable position, and they can't stand up to the rich and powerful. The whole thing just stinks of an abuse of power. It's just injustice on a massive scale, and these rich people are just dining out on it. Okay, so those are the people that James is writing about. Rich unbelievers who hoard wealth, who live in extravagance, and are renowned for their injustice. If those are the kinds of people that the believers are surrounded by, what does James want his readers to know about them? Here's the big thing for the Christians to remember as they face persecution and exploitation from these rich, that these are the last days. Judgment is coming. Think about what James said back in verse 2. You have hoarded wealth in the last days, which, as we said a moment ago, means that the next thing to happen in the timeline of history is the return of Jesus. But these rich people are totally blind to that fact. Hoarding wealth is totally pointless given that Jesus is coming back soon. On that day, all the hoards of wealth will count for nothing, which is where the squirrel nut analogy just breaks down, because at least when a squirrel hoards nuts, there's a reason behind it, because he's saving up for winter, right? Hoarding wealth is a totally pointless endeavor, because when death comes or Jesus returns, all of that wealth's just going to disappear. When you go to a funeral, as some of us did on Friday, you don't see the hearse like towing a trailer with all the people's kind of worldly possessions stored in the back, do you? People aren't buried with their wallet and bank details. Hoarding wealth is pointless because we're in the last days. But it's also dangerous because judgment's coming. Just get a sense of that from the tone in the passage. It's heavy, isn't it? Verse 1, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. This is like end times judgment language. Though these guys probably viewed their wealth as a way of avoiding pain and suffering, James wants them to know your wealth will not save you in the end. That runs counter to everything else that our world communicates to us, right? Because in this age, money talks. Yeah, that's how the world's always worked, that money gets you stuff. It's where we began with thinking about Sean Diddy Combs. Money gets you the best seat in the house. Money gets you the best view. Money gets you the best education. Money gets you the best opportunities and experiences. Money gets you the best lawyers. Listen, when Jesus returns, money won't get you anything. No amount of money in the bank or cash in hand is going to make a jot of difference to how the Lord of hosts engages with you. Which means that you can have spent your life trying to make ends meet on an impoverished back street in Sao Paulo. And if Jesus is your Lord and Savior, you can be welcomed into glory with a ring and a robe and a loving embrace from the King of the universe. And you can have spent your life in total luxury, private jets, beautiful yachts, traveling all over the world, an army of personal assistants just responding to your every whim and desire. And if you have rejected Jesus, be cast into hell, where all of your wealth will count for absolutely nothing. Those who have had all the wealth in the world and used it to oppress the poor, James wants his readers and indeed us to know that they will not get away with it. Ezekiel, who wrote hundreds of years earlier, makes exactly the same point. He says, their silver and gold will not be able to deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath. Believe that, because it's hard not to believe that in a world which tells you that money will get you anything. Verse 3, their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. I mean, that's strong, isn't it? In other words, the hoarding of wealth that we looked at earlier, this actually counts as evidence against these rich people on that final day. So hoarded wealth that just kind of sits there and corrodes, it speaks volumes. When that person stands before the Lord, it testifies against them. It's wealth that could have been used to help people. It's wealth that could have been used to support gospel work, but it's just sat there in a bank account, accumulating ever more levels of interest, and that testifies against these guys on that last day. And the result is eternal torment because of the way they've handled their wealth. That's the language of flesh being eaten like fire. Verse 4, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. So even the inanimate wages are crying out to God. They're testifying against these rich oppressors. And you can see what James is doing, right? He's comforting his readers who are these poor harvesters who are being done over financially, because not being paid was life and death to these guys. They haven't got savings. They haven't got an overdraft to fall back on. And so you can't help but read this and sense that actually God cares about the poor and he cares about the helpless. God sees and he hears and he will bring justice. This is the Lord Almighty we're talking about. It says at the end of verse 4, the Lord Almighty. In other words, don't mess with him. Justice is going to be done. As a reminder to James's readers, poverty in this life is not a sign that God doesn't care for you. He does. And all those rich who've oppressed the poor will one day face the judgment of a holy and righteous God. Okay, that's the text. And we can see, can't we, how this might have been a comfort to the people reading this letter for the first time, those who were being exploited by the rich, who were being dragged into court by them. You can see how they might have read this and taken some comfort in this. But what about us? Because in some senses, this does feel a world away from where we're at. Most of us are not being employed to mow wealthy landowners' fields and then not being paid properly. Some of us are, but most of us aren't. Okay, so where does the rubber hit the road for us today? 3 necessary implications. Number 1, don't despair. Now, we've seen this already to an extent, but the direct application of this to us is to not be anxious, right? When it feels like the rich and powerful who don't know God are just getting away with it. It can be tempting to feel like that, can't it, as we look around our world and realize how much power those with money actually have. And as Christians especially, it can feel like we're the ones on the losing end because we're not usually in those kind of positions. Instead, we're really at the mercy of those with the megabucks who basically can just do what they want and set policy and the decision-making and all those kind of things. But these verses remind us of who is in power. It is not the rich. It is the risen and reigning Lord Almighty. It is the one who will one day return with the host of heaven's armies to claim those who are his and execute judgment on all who've rejected him, regardless of their wealth status. And so if you are here this morning and you feel small in a worldly sense, if you feel like you've just got little compared to most, don't despair. We sung it earlier, right? My God is all I need. You are an adopted child of the King of Kings who owns everything. You stand to inherit it all. And so lift your eyes to see that glorious eternal reality as you face into the world's wealth right now. Don't despair. Secondly, don't envy. I mean, if anything should be an antidote to the idol of envy that lurks in our hearts when we see people with loads of money and stuff, it is surely these verses. It is going to be less of a temptation for you and I to covet when we realize how dangerous it is. That's the point of Psalm 73, that we heard earlier. Listen to these words again. This is the psalmist. He's so honest. As for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They've got no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong, and so on, as we saw earlier. Now, it's easy to think like that, isn't it? How many of us in our hearts are not inclined to envy those who just seem to have it all and seem to have it easy? You know, we see the rich and famous with their fabulous wealth, and just a part of us thinks, well, that life looks incredible. No struggles. They're all tanned and six-packs. They've got private doctors to give them constant health checks. They're traveling to beautiful places with beautiful people, eating beautiful food, drinking beautiful wine, and they just seem to get richer as they do all this. And our Instagram feeds only feed this, by the way. It's toxic for feeding envy in our hearts, and we see the prosperity and we want it. But James 5 and Psalm 73 wants to just remind us of where it's headed. It's a foolish thing to envy after. It's a foolish thing to chase after. Do you remember the conclusion the psalmist comes to? Same as that of James. He says, surely, it's like when we read the psalm, you can see his kind of brain clicking into gear toward the end. He suddenly realizes, hang on, what am I doing? And he says, surely you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly they're destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. They're like a dream when one awakes. When you arise, Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. Judgment is coming. We are in the last days. Envying the prosperous rich is crazy when we see things in light of eternity. But not only that, it's not just that we console ourselves with judgment, but we fight envy by remembering what we already have. That's why I love the end of Psalm 73, right? He spent the first half of the song honestly confessing that he can't help but envy these rich people who don't know God, but seem to have it all. But then it's like he remembers what's really true, what's way more significant, and he sings, "Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My heart and my flesh may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." And so with us, if we have Christ, we have it all. We're going to sing about it in a moment, and we sing it regularly here. Mine are days that God has numbered. I was made to walk with him, yet I look for worldly treasure and forsake the King of Kings. But mine is hope in my Redeemer. Though I fall, his love is sure, for Christ has paid for every failing. I am his forevermore. And then that wonderful finish, and mine are keys to Zion's city, where beside the King I'll walk, for there my heart has found its treasure. Christ is mine forevermore. If you have Jesus, you have everything. Don't let the world tempt you to doubt that. Preach that to yourself every day, because otherwise everything about this world is going to try and get you to believe otherwise, that you need more money, that you need more stuff. But the gospel sings, no, you don't. You've got the keys to the celestial city. And so rest in that. And don't envy the wicked as they accumulate wealth. Don't despair, don't envy. Final thing, don't imitate. Now, let's just be clear. The passage does not say, don't be rich. Okay, remember, James has talked about Abraham. He's going to talk about Job. This is not some anti-wealth manifesto, which is really important because, relatively speaking, we are all obviously wealthy. Just the fact that you live in Bath in the UK in 2025 means you are wealthy, however much you have or don't have in your bank account right now. So this isn't saying being rich is bad, but the passage has already given 3 indicators of how rich people can use their wealth in a way that is wicked. And so, though the passage isn't directly written to us as believers, we can heed the warning that is here and take it as a call not to imitate the unbelieving rich in those 3 areas we saw earlier. First, hoarding. That call. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. If you've watched Stacey Solomon's Sort Your Life Out, when they rent a warehouse and just cover the entire floor in someone's personal belongings in order to try and get them to see how much stuff they've got. Like, that's hoarding on an extreme level. Now, most of us won't be compulsive hoarders, but we still need to watch out for it. Since amassing possessions and money is a sign of success in the world's eyes, we therefore think that we've got to follow suit. How many of us have needless possessions and money in the bank that just isn't being much used for anything? Now, don't mishear me. This is not a condemnation of saving or investment. I'm not saying we've all got to go home and go full Marie Kondo and declutter and throw everything out. But if we're following Jesus, hoarding wealth and possessions is foolish and dangerous. Jesus said it himself. Don't store up treasure on earth. Somebody helpfully put it like this. Here's a challenge. Unused wealth does the kingdom no good and condemns those who refuse to use it for God's. And in that, the point is not don't be wise with your money, right, and how you spend and invest for family and give it away, but maybe, just maybe, under the guise of wisdom, we may fall into the trap of just hoarding wealth, which could actually be used by God for wonderful things. Second, extravagance. You've lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. Now, it's so easy to read this and read that verse in verse 5 and think of the person who is slightly further up the wealth bracket than we are. Right? I would imagine we're all probably sitting here doing that. To look across the room and think, oh yeah, well that person really needs to hear this. I really hope they're listening. Confession time, that was me this week. Right? I was getting into this and I was thinking of the people with more than I've got and thinking, yeah, well this is probably something they're going to need to hear. But then the Spirit convicted me, and I'm sat there working on this thinking, no, Tom, you fool. You've got to hear this. Because so often the underlying longings of my heart are just for luxury and for self-indulgence, and then the world around me feeds that craving, that longing for extravagance. Go on, just treat yourself. You deserve it. Just indulge. Just have that bit extra. Just spoil yourself. Like, we use those words all the time in church, as if it's normal. Now, that doesn't mean we can't enjoy good things, right? Ecclesiastes, great book for that. Talking about what it is to live wisely in the world and enjoy the good things that God has given us. It's not a guilt trip to say we can't have a nice holiday or go to an expensive restaurant or have a fancy car. But don't soften James's warnings about the rich to make ourselves feel more comfortable. And so it's worth doing a heart check this morning. How much does my lifestyle come perilously close to this description of living on earth in luxury and self-indulgence? Don't think about other people, think about yourself. And then third, injustice, the wages you fail to pay the workers. Now, at one level, we might think this has got nothing to say to us unless we run our own company and are actually involved in setting pay scales for our employees, which might be some of us. And if it is, then pay your employees fairly. But I think we can apply it more generally too, because affluence, and as we've acknowledged, that is all of us to some degree, it can lead to just carelessness and insensitivity. It can lead to us speaking down to people or thinking less of people who've got less than us, who might appear to be at least on some kind of different rung of a social class ladder. Or here's a really practical one. It means we look for the cheapest deal, even if it's a bit dubious about how the items we're buying are actually so cheap. I think it's worth asking questions like, what kind of companies do we support? Where do we buy from? Our purchasing habits might be furthering forms of injustice. And so we should do what we can to avoid those that exploit the economically vulnerable. Now, I'm not standing up here this morning and saying, don't shop at this place or only buy stuff from here. That's for you to work out. And we'll all have different resources at our disposal to be able to discern where we don't shop from. But don't knowingly use your wealth to buy stuff that's cheap if you know that it's furthering the exploitation of the poor. Faith in action looks like thinking about this kind of stuff. Final thing, as we finish, what is one way that we can guard ourselves against these characteristics? How can we guard ourselves against hoarding and against extravagance and against injustice? Here's a way, it's by being radically generous with our wealth. Sam Albury puts it like this, he says, we are to be those who have in order to be those who give. And if God has granted you wealth, and to some of us he's granted a bit more, and to a few significantly more, then God has gifted you with the responsibility to just be radically generous with it. The fact that we are in the last days should be exactly the stimulus we need, not to hold on to our wealth, but just to give it away. And the best way we can give away our wealth is to do so in order to see more people discover Jesus. If the most important thing for people in our world is that they know Christ, is that they discover life in Him, then the best way we can give away our money is to do so in a way that will further gospel ministry around our worlds. And wonderfully, lots in our church family are involved in that in so many ways. And I'm so thankful to God in seeing that and supporting brothers like Steve in far-flung places in the world and in supporting ministry in this city. But it might be, as we reflect on this today, that you think, actually, I am in a position to give generously to the church. We've talked in recent months about how we'd love to do things like employ a youth worker here and a pastor or planter in training, different roles that can help facilitate gospel ministry here and across our city. Both of those things are going to be an additional regular outgoing. That might be something you can get involved with. In time, you might be in a position to give generously for something one-off, supporting a church plant or something like that, things that are going to help develop gospel ministry elsewhere. It's why on this Sunday, and we do this from time to time, we've included these giving leaflets on your seats near you. If you're new or you're visiting this morning, we don't talk about money very often. We do from time to time because it's a really important part of our walk with Jesus. Let me encourage regulars here, please, take these away with you. And look, even if you've been a member of this church for years and you give regularly, it would be a really good thing to review that and to, we want to encourage people all the time to regularly review their giving. It can be so easy, can't it, to set up a standing order and then leave it and then 15 years later realize we've not thought about it for 15 years. Maybe this Sunday is a good Sunday to take this away and reflect on that. For some of us, circumstances might mean we're able to increase our giving. Perhaps for others, it will be getting involved for the first time. And let me say on that too, just as a very practical level, if you give and you're a taxpayer, please fill in a gift aid form. There is gift aid things on here. You can take this away with you, fill it in and give it to the church office. That is a wonderful means of the government supporting gospel ministry here. So please don't forget to do that. That's one practical way that we might be able to loose our heart from the money idol that can grip our hearts by being radically generous with what's God's given us. This morning we've had a wealth warning from God's words. In a moment, we're going to sing. I just want to leave you with two questions, just to reflect on quietly before that. First is this: would anyone guess that Jesus is Lord in your life by the way you make and spend your money? People in your life who you know, if they looked at you, would they guess that Jesus is Lord in your life by how you make and spend your money? And then secondly, are you a vault or a vessel? By which I mean, do you hoard your money like a vault? Or actually, are you a vessel through which money flows to bless others?